Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And today, I'm so happy to have one of my most favorite people and guests back. So please join me in welcoming back to the show, Ryan Bailey. Hi, Ryan.
Well, what up, Bish Nation? What up? Woo. I like that you're like, I do all of these things, and I'm like, I just make stupid jokes. All right, let's go.
No, you do more than that. I mean,
Yeah.
I always tell you, I just love everything you bring to the table, all your humor, everything you got going on. So thank you so much for coming back. It's been a long time. Your Bish has been in the weeds. So thank you to Ryan for being patient and flexible.
Guys, I was thinking though, it's always fun to talk to a podcaster that's like on this journey. Like I've been on it like 4 years, and how long have you been doing this now? Like a year? Like
literally, officially 1 year in August.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's really wild, like what a journey this is. And then sometimes like even this deep into it for me, like Friday night I was doing a massive like OC line by line recap. And it's like 12 midnight, and I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing here? And I'm like, I'm arguing with myself about Tamaras and Shannon, and then I'm just like, you're a grown man. What did you do here? This is midnight, and you're like, you thought you'd be done 3 hours ago. Like, it's a really insane journey doing the podcasting life.
I mean, it really is. And here's the thing: nobody hustles harder than you do. And listen, I've said this to you privately at times. Sometimes I think you are too hard on yourself. You go too hard. But like, here's the thing. It's a great distraction, right? From like the grief, the stuff, all of it. So, I mean, do you think for you that's like had something to do with it this past year?
Yeah, I mean, and just for the audience to know, my mom passed away a year ago. Today is the year anniversary of her passing. And, as we've talked before, like grief isn't linear. Like there have been first off, this year has gone so insanely quick. At times when you're in grief, it'll feel really slow. And then all of a sudden you'll build up a year, or this is a year, and you're like, oh my God, I can remember it like it was yesterday. And there's so many different variables that, I find go with grief, and people had warned me about things or shared with me their stories, and which is so really amazing, but also really scary and sad, because you realize how all of us go through all of this. All the time. And think the goal is, or what I'm working on in therapy is still finding those bright spots and finding like hope. And, negative self-talk for me has always been, it's so ingrained in me from a little kid. And we're trying to figure some of that stuff out, but I wear it like a favorite coat, like it's very natural for me to negative self-talk myself. So what I get uncomfortable with is like positive talk, like I don't mean like I love talking positive about my friends or about the shows that I love, but I get very uncomfortable if somebody gives me a compliment. I get very uncomfortable sitting in any sort of victory because that's just very hard for me. But I will say all that, like, yeah, I go way too hard, and I don't mean like I'll hustle, but it's not hustling like if you notice any of my social, it's not me going, look at me, here's my face. Like, that's very hard for me. Like, I want other people to talk about my show because they like it. I don't like to tell you to like listen to my show. Like, I get douche chills every time I post an image saying new podcast out, because I'm like, oh God. And you would think, man, you put all this work in, like, shouldn't you be proud of it? And there's elements I am proud of, but the joy in it for me is the work. The joy in it for me is pulling up to a mic, knowing who I'm talking to. I know my audience, or like I think I know my audience. Talking to you. That's why you were like, oh, do you want to do this today? And I was like, oh, heck yeah, because I'll do a lot of solo episodes, and that can it's rewarding, but it can get really isolating. Isolating. Yeah. You'll just hear like your own voice, like I'm doing now. Like you just hear yourself ramble. And that's why it's like, oh, it's so fun to talk to somebody else. So fun.
Right. And to your point, and I appreciate you sharing that information with the audience. And, because my toxic trait is that I care more about you and people than I do about my podcast. So I'm always like, are we sure we really want to do this today? Like, because I think for me, part of the humanity is like, what is so great about our podcast, I think, is being able to share those experiences with other people, because grief, whether it's from losing a loved one or, there's a million different ways to feel grief. And I experience a lot of grief just in a lot of different ways. So I think every time you talk about it, you share your experience, strength, and hope. It helps other people. But the one thing I want to validate for you is the fact how sometimes I'm trying to think of how I should say this. So growing up, things were really challenging for me. So my self-talk is really terrible. But the other day, I just want to share this with you and the audience because I think you'll appreciate it. So the other day, I was going to run an errand and I forgot my phone in my car, but I needed it to scan a little, Amazon return. And I go back to my car and I said to myself, because what you hear right now, this is in my head 24/7. My voice, constant, like the ticker, it's exhausting, okay? But I thought to myself, Melissa, you silly goose. And I thought, Melissa, did you just call yourself a silly goose instead of like a dumb bitch? Wow.
That's progress.
Or like a dumb hoe, or like whatever crazy stuff I say to myself, right? So the point is, it's like progress, not perfection. And I think, one of the most wildest things about grief that I do want to ask you about is like, when today is the year anniversary, and I feel like there's so much grief in that because it's like, well, it feels like it was so long ago, but it also wasn't long ago. And then there's grief about both of those things. That you've lived your life and it went by quick. And so then there's grief to like, oh my gosh, there's grief to that. That sounds like it resonates.
No, it's really interesting. My dad was out here this week, which was great to have him out here. And we had so many conversations, and I threw him on the podcast this week talking about this past year. And then we did a Patreon episode. I put him to work, but that's good for him as well. It's good for him to talk about those things, but we kind of keep talking about that like last week of her life, which was really, I saw things that I had never, really a horror movie. And when you think about it more, you're like remembering these things. And I just remember being so insane. And then when all of that happens, you feel like it's like your nervous system is so jacked. You feel like you could like lift a car, but at the same time, you feel like you're going to die. And then I've lost like just blanks in my memory. Like after the death, like I remember being at my parents' house for the next couple of weeks, but I couldn't really tell you. Like people will be like, oh, I texted with you. And I'm like, did you? I'm like, that's amazing. Like, I don't remember that. There are just huge like holes. Mm-hmm. And I think, I've accepted it. We've all have like a little hope. I've been building hope and I've been able to keep working. I don't want to become the grief guy. I don't want to be like, this guy used to be super funny and now he can't shut his mouth about grief. But to your point earlier, put something out before my OC recap where I was talking about dad coming out here, and he had said, it's not just worrying about myself. It's like my dad will talk about how lonely it is now. He's like, at the end of the day, I have good friends. I have you guys, but at the end of the day, I'm in that house alone at the end of the day. And that like really like triggers my all my worry, all that. Like, it's not about me anymore. It's about making sure he's okay, which is so funny because, that's how they used to be with me as a kid, of like making sure I was okay,
And that point though, Ryan, is so important, is when we grow up and our parents and start to switch roles, there's grief in that too. Because you were, right? Yeah. You were once the child being taken care of, and now all of a sudden you're caring for your parent. Care for my grandparents. I'm, their guardian and all that stuff. And it's this weird, it's not weird. It's normal, but it feels like this weird grief of like, well, this doesn't feel right. Like it busts through all of this cognitive dissonance about like, well, I'm still young. And it's like, well, no, we're not the age that our parents were, you know what I mean? And I'm like, ew, how did that happen?
Yeah, no, it's it really makes you think about time, the passing of time, like it's, this has gone on for millennia with people, and you're experiencing it now, and we will all experience it. And that's like having Dad on that show. I got so many messages immediately. And I was just talking offhandedly before I went into the OC recap. So I was like, oh, here's what's going on. And I had so many people reach out about just that 5-minute thing I did talking about my dad and loneliness. And so many people were like, oh, yeah, I lost my dad. My mom says that all that. Like, that's it. Exactly. And that part, I was like, dang, it is so awesome to be able to commune with people in that sense. And I think, that's why I talk about all of these shows to begin with, because I don't want to feel so alone. I think we all don't want to feel alone. And that's why, especially with podcasts, people make such an interesting parasocial relationship with the podcaster, or even me when I'm a listener. I make that relationship where I consider these people my pretend friends. And I have leaned on that this year when I have felt the lowest of my life. Like, even when, I've been able to keep this going for the last year, and I've recorded, and the audience hasn't known it when I've been at my lowest. Like, I'll share certain things, but I have recorded through things that would turn your hair white, like that I have not, like, but in that, it's also this kind of thing of, it's like building strength. It's going to a gym and starting off with small weights and seeing if you can, how's your stamina? How's your, and then I will say, like, I had, I did a therapist earlier when everything happened, and I couldn't keep going. I'm kind of very ashamed to admit it, but I couldn't keep it going. I couldn't, and I wasn't in a place where I think I wanted to talk with somebody professionally. And then just like a month ago, it got really bad for me, where I was feeling really desperate and out of hope completely, and just started to get actually worried about myself. And I started, I found a therapist, and, I switched up my medication, and those small steps, like, it's really hard to even make any kind of first step on anything we do in life. But that for me was the hardest. And I'm really thankful I'm on that path. But it's also just a really scary time, because if you're used to negative self-talking yourself your entire life, you can get into a really scary place if you don't have some sort of professional help or awareness that, hey, you can get lower. Like, there's no stop on, like, and you don't want to get to a place where you're putting yourself at risk in some ways. And if you can't, what do they always say? You got to put your mask on first before you can start, putting other people's masks on.
And honestly, in therapy, that's something as a therapist that I always talked about. But here's the thing, I will share the other side of the coin. So people look at me and they're like, oh, I'm a therapist. I have all these tools. I'm great at my job, but I need help too. And at one point, my grief, it took me down a rabbit hole of clinical depression that I was lucky to survive. And so I just share that, number one, because you're sharing it. And I think people listening to this, if they look to us, I think sometimes people look at people and say, oh, well, they are so amazing. I think this about them. And then when it comes to themselves, they lack that same confidence. So for me, what I like to do is just rip off our masks and say, look at us. We're humans. We're grieving. We're both on psychotropic medication, Lexapro here. Ooh, ooh. Like, whatever you need to do to save your own life, there's no shame in it. And so, Ryan, I one thing you said I just wanted to challenge you on is that you made some negative comment to yourself about, I'm ashamed to admit, like, I wasn't ready. And so what's interesting is this is going to lead us into our OC discussion, because you're talking about readiness, right? But like, here's the thing. There is stages of change and levels of motivation that it's not just about substances. It's about stuff like this too, right? Like growth and change. And sometimes we're ready and sometimes we aren't. And so instead of being hard on ourselves, like, if we try to do something when we're not ready, it's just going to fall flat. So you had to wait until you were ready and then you did it. And so congratulations. Yeah. And what an amazing gift that is for yourself, because at the end of the day, you deserve better. We all deserve better than sometimes what we give ourselves.
Yeah. And that, I think, no matter what age, it's all about building some sort of confidence in yourself, which has always been hard for me. But it's like, I can put out 10 podcasts a day. For me, that's like, that's fulfilling. It's easy. It's hard, but it's easy. Like, it's something I know I can do. But like, you try to get me to answer an email, I'll freeze up. You try to get me to like take my vitamins, like everything else in life feels so impossible and such a chore. And so like, I'll look at people that are like, oh, I ran a bunch of errands. I'm like, errands? What's that? God, it's so scary running errands. Like, for me, that's the challenge, is like the little things in life that keep you up to speed and keep you going. You try to get me to answer a DM on Instagram, and it's like, depends on which day. Depends on how my mood is. It depends on like, and I've had people in the past of like, oh, you're all full of yourself. I'm like, no, like, are you kidding me? I get overwhelmed so easily. And it's like, oh, it's fun at first. And then you're like, you hit something where you're just like, oh, I can't keep doing this. And that's the worst part of trying to, organization is completely tough for me. So that's where we're going to try to work in the next 6 months of getting that up to speed.
But you know what's interesting? You made a great point before that I wanted to piggyback on, is that grief can create very significant physiological changes. So, for example, you talked about gaps in your memory. You talked about getting overwhelmed with smaller daily tasks. With grief, that's actually really common. And so I just want to use that as an example for people listening to this to say, if you've been pathologizing yourself because like you're like, I can't do this. What's wrong with me? Or I can't, grief does those things to us. And so for me, I've been through a lot of trauma, a lot of different emotional experiences, but grief is one of those that it's just, in my opinion, it's transformative. It is transformative in a way that my complex post-traumatic stress or depression isn't, in that it's just for you. Paul Rudd once talked about this. When you lose a parent, your world is kind of off its axis and it never rights itself. And so that's just a good example of grief with a parent, but grief just in general, it's hard because sometimes there's just no changing it. There's no going back. And then there's grief in that too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that like, you go down this rabbit hole of like, well, that's sad as well. Oh, that's sad as well. Oh, think like yesterday I had this very intense visualization. And it wasn't bad, but it was intense of just, I sat there and thought, if I really envisioned my mom coming back and like going, what's been going on this year? And I was like, oh my God, she would be so excited. And I was I could see it. But like, oh my God, you're still, the podcast? That's going good? Oh, those crazy Vanderpump kids. Oh my God. Like, and I could see it, and I could see how excited, and she was in her old body because cancer had just completely destroyed her looks and all that stuff by the end. But I could see it. And then that made me sad because I was like, God, she would be that way. She would be so, and you always see this in movies or have heard this before, but it really is like, God, I would give anything for one more conversation. Like, I would give anything. And that's tough too, is when you start having these like kind of weird fantasies, which I haven't really had, but yesterday was weird. I really had this very thought out visualization, and I could picture it. I knew exactly what she would say. And I think there is comfort in that, because it's really nice to visualize somebody that you love and talking about your life. But then you're just like, but it's not. I mean, it makes you want to believe in a higher power. It makes you want to believe in something after. It makes you want to believe all in that because it crystallizes all of your feelings, all of your love, all of the good things in life. And that's why it's so weird that sometimes we have to then associate with something bad and tragic when it's this celebration of love in a lot of ways.
Right. And what you said is so poignant because, grief it's not just the absence of something, it's also the good stuff that no longer happens as a result. Or, like people who grew up with childhood trauma, it's not necessarily the abuse, it's the good things that didn't happen, the love, the hugs, the I love you. So it's, that's the funny thing about grief. It's like the absence of something and the presence of something, and all at once, it's just all encompassing. So I appreciate you sharing this with me and with the audience, because I think that this is the stuff that helps people. This is the good stuff, right? We'll go on and we'll talk about OC and we'll be, but this is the real stuff that matters. And I like when people like you and me are able to take off our masks, because it helps people realize who may put us up on a pedestal or think something about us that they don't think about themselves. We're human just like they are. And so I think it's good.
It's so funny you say pedestal, and I push back on that a little bit just because I've never want that. I want people like, I always consider my podcast, it's like, this is a conversation and I'm just the loudmouth that doesn't let you get a word in. But we're the same, me and you. And I will find this, and I don't know if you find it as well, is that my audience is sometimes way smarter than I am. And they'll tell me things where I'll be like, that's mind blowing. Oh my God. I get excited about that kind of transfer of ideas or thinking about something in a different way. Like in my own life, I'll get threatened about new ideas. That's actually not true. But, but with reality shows and people like that, I mean, I love the transfer of ideas. I love like, oh, that's how you think about it. Like, it's weird. Like, we're in this political landscape now, and like the worst of everybody is coming out because that's what it's designed to do. And it's very similar in how we talk about housewives and things like that. But it's like, if you can be open, like, listen, I might not agree with it, but I would love to hear your take. Like I do. I love when people come on the show and have a completely different opinion. I had somebody on yesterday that really dislikes Sheena, and I really like Sheena. I can understand why. They explain, why, but I'm like, well, this is how I feel and this is what I think. And I think that's the exciting thing about these shows and your podcast is that you get to look a little deeper at these archetypes, these characters, and kind of, you can take, you can relate a little bit, but sometimes they're so fantastical that it's like, well, it's good that we can't relate fully because this is completely insane. But I don't know, there's so much excitement that goes into all of this for me. And that's why I'm like, what we do, if it's important to other people, that's amazing. But it's important to me.
And I think that's really well said. And I feel the same way. To me, what you talked about is the community is what's important, right? The community of folks listening to this. I'm the same way. I don't differentiate myself from them, but I think sometimes they do with us. And so I think it's important. Like if I heard someone, for example, Gina or Emily or someone who I look to say, hey, like I'm human too, and, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, isn't that why we watch those shows, right? Because it takes our perspective and we see ourselves in these characters, and hence like why this podcast has been so successful, right? Because there's a million ways to, interpret based on our own lenses that we're wearing, our own perspectives. And so it's so interesting to me. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Ryan, is I saw a video. My friend Dana, I
was young. I needed the work. I'm sorry. What video are you talking about? Okay.
No, Ryan, no. Dana, my friend Dana from the Bravo House. Wait, shoot. The Bravo Investigator. Of course, I wrote it down and now I'm panicking.
Oh, yeah. She does. I take Bravo very seriously. Is that
Yes. That's her podcast.
Yes. I know.
Yeah. So she posted something today that she allowed me to repost, and I have her as a collaborator. It's on my Instagram @YourBishTherapist if you want to see it. But it was an outtake of Emily talking to Shane about some health issues that he had, but also, did you see what I'm talking about, Ryan?
I did not see, but I know Emily and Shane, yeah.
Yeah, so, but Emily was talking about in a deleted scene, and it was on Peacock, and Dana, she always does the best reels, so definitely go check her out for sure. But Emily was saying how, as a kid, she had to solve all of her own problems growing up, right? Her mom was absent. We've heard her grief about childhood and things like that, speaking of grief. And what she was saying is that it's hard for her to look at Jen because she didn't have the luxury of having someone to save her. And I thought, my goodness, does this not explain so much?
Yes.
And I did a repost of it, and I said, my honest opinion is Emily's projecting. Like if people realized how often we just project our stuff onto other people constantly all day, like Emily's reaction to Jen was a little bit more than it should have been, because I think she was like projecting her own stuff because she didn't have the luxury of having someone to come save her, of having daddy to come bail her out and things like that. So yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, I love, and this is what I love about Housewives, because to me, it's like the Da Vinci Code. Like, there's clues everywhere. And like, like, okay, so Emily is going hard in on Jen Pedrante's Rolex at this dinner, and she's like screaming like, "You're a loser," which, by the way, also is double fold, because I feel like it's all of what you just said, but also the influence of Tamara in those situations, who had spent that dinner going, "Lie, lie, lie, you're an alcoholic," like just screaming out the most insane, hurtful things in the name of tough love. But back to Emily, what I love about that is that it does explain so much, because like you would say, is that our behaviors come from somewhere. Whether you're going over that in therapy, which I'm doing now, going back to like childhood and thinking of certain kind of things or what got me to this place, there is a roadmap. And to me, that's really exciting. It's really exciting to know that there is a roadmap of how we get to this point, because it's not just, I mean, I will say that's sometimes my least favorite Housewives, when they're just putting on a show and there's not real behavior behind it. They're just thinking this is what the audience, like the razzle dazzle, what the audience wants.
That's why I don't like Salt Lake, because I feel like that's Salt Lake. You just described Salt Lake.
Well, to me, there was a little bit with, I mean, they're all a little bit more character driven in terms of like big characters. Jen Shaw back in the day tried to do everything all at once because, she had watched so many Housewives seasons. Or back in OC a couple seasons ago, Noella, which was like a 1-season wonder. She was, I think, so all over the place that I never truly got to know who she was at all, because she was like 10 different people. And I think she was trying on each one to see what the audience or the production was going to respond to. Like, so I never felt like we got in there. That's why I always think there needs to be a mandatory minimum 2 seasons on any housewife. You can't do one and dones because it never gives them a shot. Like this year, I love Katie, and I actually think Katie's fitting in nicely if she, she's getting caught up in this paparazzi storyline, but it's not even her. It's like everybody's keeping the storyline going. But like, she better get a second season, because you're only going to get to know more of what's going on with her. And when you do one and dones, I feel like you leave a lot on the dance floor. You leave a lot just to, to me, that's content that you're just leaving out there. We got to invest in our housewives.
Yeah, sure. And I think what you're saying is, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is that we need some authenticity. It can't just be performative, glam nonsense. It's like there's got to be something authentic about the people that we're watching, like Elizabeth Vargas. So I talked about this with, I didn't remember that she was a one and done housewife.
Yes. It was a COVID season, so that's not your fault. It was a weird time. It was like the COVID season of Orange County. And it was like Kelly Dodd. It was like a very weird season. And then she brought up some very interesting things about her childhood. Like, I mean, I think midway through the season where I was like, oh, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. But I love that she pops back up and she's like, hey, can I stay? Like, hey, like, do you need me? Like, hey, I got a big house. I got a Bentley. I'm still rich. Like, I love when people pop back and you can sense that they want to be there, like, I'll just be in the guest room. I won't even bother, Yeah,
I got the sense that Elizabeth was like, production, can I just stay? Can I just be in my house and stay for this? But so going back to Jen Pedranti and Emily, I definitely think that in my experience, there are 2 groups of people. And I am in the Emily group where, as a child, I had to solve a lot of my own problems. And I didn't have the luxury of people coming to save me. So I have a reaction to Jen. And so your point is that if we do the work, our behaviors tell us what's going on. Like, it is like solving the Da Vinci Code with ourselves, but you have to be paying attention and it takes a lot of work. And so some people, it's easier to just live in a denial, like Jen, I think, right? A denial of, well, if I just put my foot in this pie and do an OnlyFans, right, I'll be fine. Whereas Emily would pull herself up by her bootstraps and do something real different, right? And
it's also why why her relationship with Shane works for her. Because Shane, no matter what you think of Shane, I personally love Shane. I think he's funny, is that he is a rock. He's stable. Mm-hmm. He's there. He's not going to leave.
Right.
Like he is there. And that's what Emily is not used to. So of course this is attractive. To have build a family that she never had. I mean, yes, that's it exactly. So that's why their relationship works. But that's why I love Emily, because you do sense like, man, this did get her to this place. And also in just how she relates to these other women and her friendship with Gina. And in this past week's episode, or I don't know when this will come out, like 2 weeks ago, when the pickleball fight happened, I'm watching a fight between two people that genuinely talk to each other on the off season. You know, they're like, these are people that are really in each other's lives. Yeah. When cameras go off, then you have to compete with like Heather and Tamara and different like outside forces. But when the cameras go down, they still have this friendship. And I love watching something that feels like it's been lived in. You know, like I feel like, because the shorthand is already gone. Like the first season of RHOC, this past one, it's like I liked it a lot, but we were getting to know these ladies at the same time that they were getting to know each other. You know, like we're watching them do that beginning uncomfortable work when a lot of any good housewives or reality shows, the relationships are already there. We just get to peek in like voyeurs.
Right. But exactly to your point is that you can tell that Gina and Emily have a real sisterhood. When I watched the two of them, I have in my notes here, when I watched the two of them argue, it to me seemed like two sisters who were hurt.
Yes.
Who were hurt. And it was like, so essentially, I kind of broke it down. So on the surface, it seemed like their argument was about Gina feeling that Tamara is a bad influence on Emily's attitudes and behaviors, okay? And it seemed like Emily felt Gina alters her behavior with Heather, which, let's face it, she probably does.
Yes.
But really what it was about, it was like a bubbling under the surface. Gina worried that she and Emily's relationship would go the way of Tamara and Shannon, aka toxic as holy hell. And I think Gina overreacted due to her fear and grief over like, listen, Gina's in the weeds right now. Travis moved out. She needs support. Like you said, we all need support and connection. So I think Gina overreacted due to fear and like grief of like, oh my gosh, if I don't have Emily, what do I have? And then I think Emily overreacted just because she had hurt feelings. Because when you're really friends with someone, what they think of you and what they say matters. It's not housewife BS. It's really meaningful and important. So I feel like Emily confronting Gina by saying, this sent me when because here's the other thing. Not only is Emily, she's authentic, she works on herself, she is gorgeous, she is hilarious. And she said, and I quote, we could never be like Shannon and Tamara because, quote, those two are dysfunctional nut jobs.
Yes, that was great. That was great. And, it was totally dead on. But I also like with the Gina and the Heather of it all, it's like, of course, Gina is going to act a little differently because we've made it such an issue with Gina. Like we put her in a financial storyline. We called her Casita Gina for all the time. Like we've put her there. So of course, if somebody that like takes private jets is going to take an interest in you, is going to take a shine to you, you are going to cater sometimes to that relationship. And you're potentially not going to be yourself. So it really is interesting, a couple episodes ago when Gina told Heather of like, I'm sorry, you know what? You could either take it or you can't. Like, it's like Gina kind of standing up for herself a little bit with Heather. And I think Heather had no choice but like, okay, then I will let this continue, but I will keep an eye on it. And it's like, oh God, Heather, come on.
Here's what I have to say about Heather, okay? So do you remember when Heather's mom would come on the show in past seasons? We got a little glimpse into that.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my opinion, Heather has worked hard to not be that way with her kids, but I think she's that way with everybody else. And when I say that way, I mean literally call her a punisher. She is a punisher with her friendships in that so unlike Gina and Emily, a real friendship requires being able to say, hey, you're fucking up here. Or, hey, I'm concerned about this behavior. A real intimate relationship requires that. Heather, in my opinion, isn't capable of that. She's not capable of someone telling her, Heather, it's a little much or what have you. She can't accept that. Her defenses are so high. So I get the sense that Gina knows with Heather that like Heather's passive aggressive, like icy kind of punishment of Gina knows, I imagine, that if I'm going to be friends with her, it requires accepting that A, I can never be fully honest with her, and B, she's just going to be passive aggressive and ice me out. But I think that's why we see such a difference between Emily and Gina versus Gina and Heather, right?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. Yes, of course.
Because it's authenticity versus Heather, like fancy pants, refusing to like ever be wrong or imperfect, or, you know, Heather just has such a perfectionistic tone and tenor to everything that she does. And that's just not an authentic, good way to live.
But I like the point. I like the way that you pointed out also is that she doesn't seem to be this way with her family, because she seems like, you know, they seem like they have such a strong family unit, her and her kids. And I mean, we've had storylines in the past with Terry not hanging out with the kids all the time, but my God, he's like making money for all these mansions. But it is interesting to be like, we can be different with our families than we are in the outside world at large. And that's what's interesting about Heather, is that you can sense this real person in there, this person that came from like, you know, but came from humble beginnings, that worked their way up into like the Hollywood, you know, I'm an actor, I'm on a sitcom, like, you know, then to meet Terry and then to build this really insane life together. By the way, like her and Terry, I've never seen a couple more perfect for each other. They both love to be on TV. They like, it's not just money. They like to be, you know, that's why the paparazzi storyline is so kind of convincing, because even if she didn't call them, you could imagine a world in which she would. You know, like even Terry goes, I love having my picture taken. Like, and I'm like, thank you, Terry. You're so honest. You're like, you know, Terry, people forget he's been doing this. You guys remember in 2005, there was that horrible Fox reality series called The Swan. He was the head plastic surgeon on The Swan. I was revisiting that show a couple weeks ago. And he's the head dude. He was the head surgeon. And that was like, put him on the map. But he always wanted this.
You just blew my brain right now, because how did I not connect that? And you're absolutely
I forgot about it entirely.
Oh God. Ryan,
there's a rich history in reality TV, you guys. There's a rich history. If you go back, it'll blow your mind.
Wow. Coming with the receipts, and I love it. But yeah, I mean, to that point, had Heather approached this in just a way of like Terry did, oh, we love our picture being taken, but it wasn't us. And it could have just been dead there. But Heather's overreaction to this does make me think, as a therapist, that there's got to be a kernel of truth behind what's going on here. Otherwise,
Melissa,
she wouldn't be reacting this way.
Okay, this is what this is like me talking to myself during my recaps, where I was trying to figure it out, because it seems like this is personal. This is more than just, because in my thing, I don't care who calls the paparazzi. I assume they all do. And I could care less. I really could care less. To me, it's kind of funny. It's kind of quirky. I'm like, yeah, just say, yeah, who cares? Like, but I started to think, and she said one line a couple of weeks ago about her kids. Like, I had to explain this to my kids. And I'm like, explain to your kid, like, that the paparazzi exists? Like, who cares? And then I realized during that time period, it was literally, though, it wasn't the paparazzi. It was the fact that there was a rumor that Terry had cheated on Heather. That was it. And so then that got me thinking about it differently of, this isn't just about paparazzi. The paparazzi pick was there to show that this is a united front. They are still together. And that's the part that I think, because I feel like we almost missed a whole scene that they cut out of the show, or they did. And that's what sometimes these shows now are about, you guys. It like fascinates me. It's like about what they keep off the show more than what they share on the show. And like, they're all speaking in circles, where even like with the Gina and Travis stuff, I'm like, we're not talking about a huge piece of this that is like not adding up, and why it's Travis's ex. Like, we throw it out there, but it's like, oh, the kids need more space. I'm like, wait, what? I'm so confused. But that's what it is. It's personal because of that cheating allegation. And that I can understand, but why aren't we talking more about that? Like, why is it the paparazzi instead of the actual issue?
Well, here's why, Ryan. And I think you're exactly right. And this goes back to classic projection, which is what I talked about initially with Emily, is that I agree that when someone's behavior, when the energy is over what we might expect, there's something that we're missing. And I agree with you that I think it's about the cheating stuff, not so much paparazzi stuff, but to answer your question of the why is because Heather doesn't want to talk about it, right? So if she doesn't want to talk about it, she's certainly not going to clarify. She's certainly not going to draw more attention to it. And in fact, I think the focus on the paparazzi stuff is like, oh, look over here, look over here, look over here, distraction type of thing, right? So let's not focus on the story that led to the paparazzi gate. Let's just focus on paparazzi gate. I just think it's classic projection, deflection, avoidance, what humans do, right?
Yeah. And but when we understand that and think about that, then it makes Heather actually relatable. Then it makes then you have empathy for Heather. And I feel like sometimes she projects such a strong, fierce image, and I will cut you down if I need to, and I will make you pay, and you will not do this twice to me. So that's interesting. But if we have that little piece of information, I think, and this is a great lesson to all of us in our lives, is that we always think that that's going to make us look weak, or that's going to make us look, and to me, that makes us more relatable. Shannon Bedore, to me, having the season of a lifetime, because she is open, because somebody's coming out against her, and we're able to see her story through a different lens, which then gives us empathy. And why we go so hard against Tamara, because when you are just a automaton hate machine, and that's the only color you're showing, we won't go there. When you tear up about your child, we are less likely to empathize and sympathize in those moments, because we see that you act from a place of what feels like hate, but you're calling tough love.
Right. And so I think to your point is that we humans miss a huge important piece of what actually makes them powerful. I think when people think about sharing their emotions, being vulnerable, that feels really scary depending on how people grew up, right? If you were vulnerable with people growing up and you got hurt for that, well, then you're going to have a hard time being vulnerable. But I agree with you, and I think it's such an important point, is that if these housewives would just realize that's the stuff that we really want. Like, yeah, fun shade and drama is great, but we want to see the tears. We want to see the vulnerability. We want to see the person behind the rich. The Dubrows are rich, honey. And I'm just like, oh, God bless. But let's see the real you.
This is why it's so interesting. And I love this conversation, because we do this in our own lives all the time. Like, I have this bad pattern since childhood of I'll just tell somebody what they want to hear, because I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to get along. I want, it's so much easier. I'll withhold information. I'll because I think that's going to be better and less hurtful. I'm really not good with conflict, all of these things. And then, you do this. And by the way, it never is better. It's always proven to be a disaster every time I do it, but I can't seem to learn that lesson. And that's something that's interesting. And it's almost then having to do that, having to put yourself in these uncomfortable situations and realize that, wait, that's better. But in our minds, we're like, no, this is the way to go. This is what to do. And then, you're so used to this, even though it fails every time, even though you get blowback every time, you're like, no, it's so ingrained. So it's almost having to retrain yourself. And I love that thought of Heather not being able to realize that, almost thinking that projects weakness rather than strength, when weakness can sometimes be complete strength.
Well, exactly. But what you're talking about is neural pathways run very deep, right? When we grow up learning to do things a certain way, that neural pathway is like a deep road that when you try to move it, it's automatically going to fall back in that neural pathway crease. Like, this isn't scientific. I'm just giving a little bit of a visual to what I'm saying here, is that people don't realize how hard it is to change those patterns. And we're always going to go back to what I call my factory default setting. So my factory default setting is to be afraid to be vulnerable and to not want to share. And so what people don't realize is you have to act opposite to get those neural pathways to change, to branch off, so that eventually, Ryan, your factory default setting will not be to do those things. But it takes a lot of hard work, number one. And number two, we can't change, people get so comfortable in their stuff. I use this analogy of we all have our pile of garbage, right? and it's gross and it smells and it's literal garbage, but it's our garbage and it's warm and it's like, it fits to the shape of our body. And so someone coming to say, hey, get out of that garbage. You're like, nah, I'm good here. And they're like, you're literally in a pile of garbage. You're like, no, but I'm still good. I'm used to the smell. I can work with this. And then you get out of it and you look and you're like, what on earth was I doing? Like, but my point in sharing this is that it's a human condition to be more afraid of change than you are of staying in the same bad place.
Yes. Because the not knowing, like the not knowing, it makes you feel so icky and it makes you feel so, and it's really, there's examples in all our lives of this. And that's why I really sometimes admire the people that are, that push forward into obliviousness, that can like, hey, just keep going. I'm never going to reflect. I'm never like, sometimes you're like, God, it must be not like, I mean, sometimes they truly don't seem to like be thinking about inner work at all. And I think that is a really interesting to see then on screen. Do you think there's anybody on OC Housewives that's not doing any kind of actual serious self-reflection? Because we know Shannon is this season, right? Or we're led to believe she is.
Oh, well, I believe that Shannon is. Because one of the things that I feel allergic to people who don't self-reflect, to your point, because I work so hard at it. I've worked to save my own life on multiple occasions. So I don't respond well to someone who's just like you said, la 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 in the clouds, refuses to look at it. That bothers me. I never liked Shannon because I always felt that that's how she was. She didn't want to look at stuff. She was in her pity pool. This season, to me, very different. Very different. I'm seeing a very different Shannon.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful for that. And it actually has made me soften towards her because here's the thing. I can get down with anybody who wants to really say, okay, I fucked up. I got to look at my stuff, right? I can get down with anybody who does that. And so what I think, I did a little post about this on Instagram where I think Shannon, Tamara, and Vicky have formed a drama triangle. There's something it's called Cartman Drama Triangle.
Oh, I thought it was called Tres Amigas. Okay.
Tres Amigas, aka the Cartman Drama Triangle.
Yeah, exactly.
No, literally. And I made a meme about this and people loved it because it was so hilarious. But it's like Shannon always puts herself in that victim role. And what Tamara's doing is she's putting herself in the persecutor role, which is just doing nothing but making her look like a mean girl. Yeah. And the whole, here's what I want to say about addiction, because there's some nuances here. And I wrote about this on my Instagram, is like, I get the sense that Tamara thinks that Shannon is in denial about her quote unquote alleged alcoholism. And Shannon believes that she's used alcohol in unhealthy ways, but she does not identify as an alcoholic because she thinks she can control her drinking. Right. And so as a therapist, and I've worked in patient residential treatment facilities, I've had a lot of history working with people with addiction. And I understand how Shannon's view of her own drinking triggers Tamara. Because as a therapist, I say there's for sure denial and minimization there still. Like I just have sat with too many people who say to me, I'm not ready to be done, and I think I can control this. And I think that a lot of times they're fooling themselves. However, I want to be really clear is that two things can be true. People can have a problem with alcohol and not identify as an alcoholic. And so as a clinician, the most important thing I like to share is that a lot of times people, the average Joe, views issues as black and white, but in the business of humanity, there are many area of shades of gray. And so I think that what Tamara was trying to do, and people kept telling me, well, you're making excuses for her. And I'm like, I'm not making excuses for anyone. This is just my interpretation. I think Tamara is trying to control Shannon's behavior because there is a part of her that's concerned, but because of the way she's acting, she's making herself look ridiculous, in my opinion. But I think she's really scared for Shannon. And I think while that's not okay, that's not the way, like, you can't just say to someone, well, when I love someone, this is how it is. Like, that's not an excuse to be abusive to somebody just because you're upset. Like, that's not okay.
Well, that's why I think like her classifying this as tough love is I was like, dude, you do not know what tough love means then, because this is not tough love. This is like roasting someone at their worst, is that like, you can choose to untangle yourself from a relationship, but that doesn't mean you scream at them that they're an alcoholic every chance you get and do the worst jokes of like, you got to go get booze? Is that where you're going to get alcohol? Like that to me, that's not tough love. That's like a bully now. You're like bullying somebody. And that's why Tamara and I had these conversations, so much about you need a villain on these shows. I don't want Tamara to ever get fired. I want her to stay there. I know she's an essential part of all of this, but it's really hard to watch when somebody really has hit one of their lowest moments on top of, we haven't even touched on Alexis, but that's why that last scene with her and Tamara last week's episode was so great is that Tamara started in with her usual BS and her usual, like, I thought you would have called me. Like, why would Shannon call you after all you do is literally call her an alcoholic? But Shannon did this amazing thing where she's like, I've got to get up. She didn't yell. She's like, I got to get up. She removed herself from the situation. She came back. She explained, that's something I'm learning, something I'm working on in myself. And I was so proud of her in that moment because it seemed so genuine. And in terms of self-work, the reason I had asked that question initially, because a lot of these people, I mean, I really always get the strong sense that Tamara does not do any inner work because she just thinks that her way is the right way all the time.
Okay, so I will say, to answer that question, do agree that Tamara doesn't seem to me that Tamara does the work. However, also understand that Tamara for the show versus Tamara as a person, I get the sense that they're two very different people.
That's what I say all the time. I said, I bet she has a very decent life outside of Housewives,
Yeah, so for me, it's like I have trouble making that, discerning that, but I would definitely agree that Tamara's one of those people who she'll just say, well, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And it's like, well, we're going to leave it because that's not acceptable. Like, that's okay. Bye then.
Okay.
No,
see you next season. Yeah. No, yeah. I'm good.
So I think she does herself a disservice. And I do think Tamara is very defensive in that she has a hard time looking at her own stuff and instead just doubling down and being like, it's tough love, instead of being like, you know what? I felt this was tough love, but I'm hearing that it's coming across harsher and it's clearly not working. The other person to answer that question that I don't think is doing work on themselves is Jen. 1,000%. Jen Pedranti.
Well,
I don't think she is doing anything to work on herself. But
come on, she does yoga, Melissa. Come on, she's a yoga teacher.
That's what I wanted to say. People who do yoga and who are spiritual, like Kristen Doty, right, with all her crystals and shit, it's like
she's an empath. What do you?
Go to therapy. Yeah, forget the crystals. Forget the yoga.
Well, I mean, any of the men in Bravo, it's like Jack's going to a Reiki healer, Tom Sandoval doing scream therapy. How about just regular therapy? How about the ones where you just talk with your words? It is so funny. It's like, Jesse Lally on the Valley goes and does ayahuasca. Like, what about just regular therapy?
Well, because here's the thing. It's all shortcuts, right? People who don't really want to grow or change but want to appear as if they're looking that way. Kim Zolciak is another really good example because I've been.
Oh God, she spent like $1 million on crystals. Remember when she would buy crystals all the time?
Right. And it's like, Kim, the call is coming from inside the house. Like, fix you first. And then all this other stuff, like the manifestation and all of this, it's all a giant distraction for people who want to look like they're healing, but really aren't. And so that I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a rant, but I get frustrated with Jen for the same reason that other people do, is that she appears to take this very fawning victim stance and want everyone to come to her aid. But it's like, you're a grown woman and you have 5 children. So I think it's time to start addressing some of that stuff. Become literate when it comes to financial, right? Pay bills, get a credit card. Get some savings, like get a job, be an adult. I understand why it bothers people. I do.
Well, that's what, and it bothers Emily. But I always say on my show, recapping this, Jen Pedranti is a very interesting character because it almost makes sense that you're like, oh, yeah, she was cryogenically frozen for the last 25 years and she's been uncryogenically frozen this year and goes, bills? What are these bills everybody speaks of? Like, she doesn't know how to do anything. And you can make that argument of like, yes, her husband did everything and men have always done everything, which, interesting enough, now she's in a similar relationship with Ryan, who is, doing everything for her. And that's like, it's like, yeah, like But that I would imagine, and I will say Jen has nailed it sometimes. Jen had a tough conversation with Tamara last week in terms of you want to think your approach to Shannon maybe a little differently, which I love that she did that because Tamara is a hard person to talk to. Gina had a similar conversation with Tamara last episode as well, where it's like, yeah, don't be scared of Tamara. Like, tell her what you guys think. But they come at it from this loving way, where Tamara comes at it of like, I will destroy, I will make you feel foolish, I will make fun of you. And they're like lightly telling Tamara of like, you might want to think of a different way. So Jen knows about behavior. Like Jen knows of like what she sees, but it's really wild that she wants to not enact any of that in her own life. And that's why it's going to be interesting to watch her journey. I love watching her because it is this interesting thing of just watching somebody that seems like they don't even know how to walk, and they're like, whoa, this is so foreign to me,
Right. And here's the thing. This might sound crazy, but even though I just said what I said about Jen, I think she has great potential because I think she's a really lovely human being. I think she's a good person. I think she's kind. I think she is gentle. I think she is, she has her finger on the pulse. Like when she was talking to Tamara about her treatment of, Shannon, I thought it was brilliant. Like you said, I think it was said with love and it was appropriate. And so I think my thing with Jen is like, girl, you got to do better because you're good. You're one of the good ones. You're a good-hearted person. You have some good things to say. You have an interesting, life. So let's get rid of all this junk and be who, but I want that for Jen. Jen's got to want that for Jen because as you said, she's repeating the same pattern, which tells me that she's not doing the work, right? You said something before about learning lessons, and I believe that the universe hits us over the head with lessons until we're in enough pain to say, all right, I got to do this different.
Hell yes. Heck yes. And also there's a little bit, and I know I don't want to get anybody upset, there's a little bit of Teresa in Jen Pedranti in terms of repeating similar relationships of like,
ignoring
but
red
flags. but at the same time, like and people might disagree with me, I think at the core, Teresa is a loving person, like at the core, but she does kind of go whichever way the man wind blows in terms of who she's with. I feel like that is not changed. It's just changed faces in terms of relationships in her life. So I'm excited. And in seeing the midseason trailer, we do know that obviously Jen and Tamara getting into it because Tamara this is another example of Tamara loving to kick somebody when they're down. And I wonder sometimes the psychology behind Tamara because I feel like here's somebody that's been on reality television so long that they're seeing life in terms of storylines rather than life. So they're like, oh, Ryan's in trouble with the FBI. I'm going to go to a party supply store and get an FBI hat so I can be Carrot Top in a scene and go womp womp. Right. Like to me, that's wild. Like think about your worst moment and you imagine if you had your worst moment, Tamara's looking for props to make you feel worse. Like that's the kind of friend she is because of I always think, is Tamara always been like that or did the show turn her into that? But then I was talking to somebody last night and they were watching OC from Tamara's first season. And they're like, no, she's always been like that. She's always been like that.
I think Tamara views it as this is the show and what's good for the goose is good for the gander, meaning
and she's kind of right.
She was subject to a lot of this herself with her ex and, Eddie in the beginning and that bathtub scene and all this stuff. So I think she feels like there are people out there who believe in eye for an eye type of thinking. And as someone who doesn't subscribe to that, because I don't think that's a very enlightened perspective, but I think that's the perspective that Tamara has, right? Is eye for an eye. Well, I'm doing my job and I'm running storyline, but I think you're right in that it's like, well, but then how much is that enmeshing with who you really are as a person? And that's where I feel like Tamara could be going the way of Teresa, in that don't get lost in this housewives world. Like just because you're on a really important part of it, this can end. And I don't know.
Well, what's also interesting, because she has an insanely successful podcast where she talks about other housewives and their behavior. So she's very aware. And my theory on Tamara too is that at some point, she's convinced herself she's on a reality competition series rather than a reality show. So she's always trying to win. She's playing it like a game, like Survivor, rather than the Real Housewives. And if you go back and watch those early seasons of OC, like I always say, it almost now reads like an Oscar short documentary, because it's so different. The way it's shot is so different. And now, this is before you knew what a housewife was. These ladies were just being themselves, for better or worse. And now it's the Housewives. It's like getting cast on SNL. People audition for this show. It's like a completely different thing than how it started. And that's not necessarily bad. But I do wonder, it's just like how we wondered about Tom Sandoval, when you've done something for so long, it's so ingrained in you that it also excuses all of your worst behavior. It gives you a paycheck to sometimes ignore that. I mean, Alexis Bellino, to me, is like a suicide bomber. Like, oh, you got back on the show, but your literal one goal, even though you keep saying it's not, and production says you were going to be on anyways, is just to make Shannon's life worse. And you're going in there with like a high school crush going, I will save the name of John Jansen. Nobody cares about saving John. Nobody, this isn't the Real Housewives of John Jansen. Like, what? I mean, to me, that's like wild. Like, you've got back on the show and you're wasting this opportunity, or it's just that they knew they were going to use you for this one specific reason, and that's it. Like, she's not setting herself up for success, because we don't know a damn thing about her life other than that she loves to have sex with John Jansen.
Which, here's the thing. Alexis is going the way of Esophagate, or not going the way. She's gone. She took Esophagate and she went to the Olympics.
People are saying about the paparazzi storyline. It's this storyline. It's Johnny J every time. Even Tamara goes, oh my God, she won't shut the F up. Because, by the way, clock it. If she gets back on the show next week, Tamara will go against her.
Well, we did see, so in the mid-season trailer, we do see that we're going to get this shift from the storyline of Shannon's drinking and Shannon and Tamara and all that to Jen, Pedranti, and Ryan, aka all the
financial crime,
right. But so one thing I just wanted to mention really quick, because I know we're kind of winding down. One of the things
I've got as much time as you want, so don't whatever.
Okay. So going back to Shannon, though, I wanted to talk about something called harm reduction. So as I talked about, two things can be true. You can identify as having a problem with alcohol, but not identify as an alcoholic. And so the one thing that I wanted to say is that there's something called harm reduction, which is, recovery is more than just sober or not sober. And so harm reduction is grounded in justice and human rights. It focuses on positive change and on working with people without judgment, coercion, discrimination, or requiring that people stop using substances as a precondition of support. So I understand it sounds odd, but I just wanted to explain a little bit about it, is that, so harm reduction method, it recognizes the gray area where people who are in the pre-contemplation stage of change, which is essentially denial, right? Denial, they can still make positive change to protect themselves and others. So in other words, if some people aren't ready to stop using, there are ways to work through denial and minimization that result in healthy outcomes. And as a therapist, I like to call it planting seeds. So I feel like for me, I just didn't want this podcast to go by without mentioning that, because I have a huge sober community that follows me and listens, and I appreciate them very much. And so there were some people who said, thank you so much for bringing this out, because Tamara is making this seem very black and white. And so often people who don't understand addiction, who aren't educated, and going through addiction personally isn't necessarily, let's say Tamara had something like that in her family. If you don't work on that stuff, you likely end up projecting onto somebody else, which is, again, what I think is happening with Tamara. She's projecting her stuff. From what I remember, her dad drank a lot. This hasn't really been talked about. But I think because of the way that Tamara grew up, she's projecting her stuff onto Shannon. But I did want to make that point about, the only person who knows what's best for Shannon is Shannon and her therapist, healthcare provider, whatever you want to call it, practitioner, right? Those are the only two people that really know what's best for Shannon. And I think that it's just an important concept that's not often talked about. And one of the reasons I'm glad to have this podcast is that recovery isn't black and white. And so I think that I'm looking forward to seeing the storyline shift, because to me, it's going to get old and tired. And I want to see more of this stuff with Jen and Ryan and what's going to go down with that.
Well, it's interesting because in pop culture and covering a lot of pop culture, like you said earlier, is like people want things like, unfortunately, to be black and white. Like it's easy to label somebody a villain. It's easy to oh, they're perfect and they're a villain and that's it. And then you realize that life and pop culture and reality, there's so much gray area. There's like, well, you've got to understand this is what led to this. This is why this exists. And people don't want to sometimes look deeper. And that's why I love communities like this that actually do focus on the deeper of it all, because there are reasons. It's not just, that's sometimes where Tamara does get a little confusing, because sometimes she wears that villain role so proudly and like that it almost makes you not want to go back and like into her past and go, why is this? Because it's so repugnant where you're just like, I can't go there. It's hard. But I think that's sometimes what audiences miss, is that there's, obviously a reason why they got to this place. And I think it's weird that people don't find that sexy. They find immediate anger towards somebody sexy. They find that the interesting thing of like, I'll hate you now immediately. And then when it's explained, that's never the thing that like travels, like that's the thing. It's that immediate reaction that travels. And that's this like hate economy or rage baiting that we get into, that I get into all of the time. Then you're like, oh, this is why this happened, or this is why. Nobody wants that stuff. By the time that feeling has subsided, you're like, oh, okay. Oh, I didn't have to get that angry. Got it.
Right. And here's the thing, to your point, everybody has a story. And as a clinician, the biggest thing that I've learned about humanity is that people who are in the most pain are going to behave the worst. And that's just period, end of sentence, right? And so for me, when people have bad behavior, I have a lot of compassion for that, because as a clinician, you can't just have someone come to therapy, act like a raging douche and be like, well, we're done here. No, that's not how it works. So I think it allows me to have a perspective that is important to share, because there's reasons why Tamara's behaving this way, but because she's behaving like such a bully, people don't want to look at that. They just want to be like, she's vile. And it's like, she's not vile. She's a human just like you and I. But yeah, are her behaviors cool? No, but there's a reason for them. And
but even in that scene, Melissa, she's like, sits down at the table, immediately hits Shannon with, well, I, was hoping that you would be the one to call me. And then Shannon starts explaining what she's going through. And like in a because you said earlier too, like, the previous Shannon Bedore seasons, you could make the argument that she did play victim at times, that she was, really comfortable in that role. And this season, when she actually, because of Alexis, not because of her own behavior in terms of, the car situation, she is actually a victim this season, but it's the first season where I don't feel like she's playing the victim. Like, the first season, it's very different if you look at older seasons. And that's why it's so interesting that they brought Alexis on, because in some ways, you just made this person more empathetic in terms of our feelings on Shannon. You've made her stronger. And I don't mean stronger like she wants the power, because she doesn't. But I don't think she's lying when she was telling Tamara of like, I'm getting all of this kindness and I don't even think I deserve it. And it's so good. Like, imagine you guys, when you're at your lowest, we've all had some moment where we're like, it'll never be the same. I'll never be able to pull out of this hole. Nobody. And then somebody reaches out to you with just the little bit of kindness, a little bit. And it is like having water if you've been walking in the desert for 2 years. It is literally, it really, everything. Like, it's like, it changes everything. So to me, that was a very real moment. And what does Tamara do? Tamara goes, so I wasn't a good friend to you for 10 years? Is that what you're saying? I wasn't good like that? Like, no, this isn't about you. Like, everything on these shows is like, this isn't about you. We find that so hard to believe because in our narcissistic, like, dark side, we want everything to be about us. And in this, Tamara cannot accept that this isn't about her.
Yeah.
And that makes me so sad.
I know. I think Tamara has a hard time when she feels hurt. She does behave like a petulant child, right? Because what does a child do when they're hurt or trying to, they're going to insult you, they're going to say things. And so I feel that she really, at the base of all this behavior, is hurt. but it isn't okay. And I was so grateful to see Tamara soften at the end with Shannon, because had she not done that, I don't even know that I could have continued to support, right, her. Because here's the thing, I can explain the behavior, but personally, I'm not going to support, behavior that's just unkind and wounding people. So I was grateful to see Tamara soften. And I think in that moment, she was like, forget the TV show, forget this. Yeah. My friend is hurting. And it was almost like a fog was lifted. And she, I don't know. It was nice. I know.
I agree. But Melissa, this is just of watching, my brain's like mush from watching, all of these seasons, is that I see that. And I agree. Like, it was so nice to see a moment of like, let's let down our swords. But we've seen this, if you're talking about behavior and patterns of behavior, we've seen this so much with Tamara that for me, I've seen it so much where when Shannon goes, can I have a hug? I was like, no, Shannon, no, don't. She's going to use it against you. Don't tell her about the John Jansen lawsuit. Do not tell her, because she's going to collect that information like a squirrel with a nut and use it against you in next week's episode. To me, it almost like the audience is so conditioned to think that it's BS when it comes to Tamara. I love seeing that. But there is something of like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I'm like, I don't know if it's genuine. I will say this too. Sorry to keep yapping you guys, but Jeff Lewis, I'm on the Jeff Lewis show like once a week now. And this past week I was on with Mercedes Javid from Shaw's. And, what's interesting about Jeff, first off, is that his show isn't about like reality shows and housewives. He'll have guests and stuff, but they don't do like full breakdowns of like episodes. But Mercedes really wanted to talk about OC this season. And I was like, I'm always down, Mm-hmm. And then Jeff was in on that conversation. And now Jeff has relationships with both of these women, right?
Right.
Really good friends with Shannon, really good friends with Tamara, which has got to be such a weird situation to be in. But I think Jeff is used to scenarios like this. He's okay at that. But it was very interesting because I'm sitting here like talking to you and explaining like, this is not what you do to a friend. I was like, Jeff, if Shane came in here and talked badly about you to your face every day on the radio, there's one part of you that would be hurt and one part of you that would be upset. And you would just say, this is not the way to go about it. But it was very interesting because he was like, I was shocked because he was like, well, they both have some valid points here, and you got to realize that, they have had this relationship for 10 years. And Tamara has seen all of this stuff with Shannon and, stuff that doesn't even make the show. And there is real worry there. And I'm like, well, that's amazing to hear. And it's always important to keep in mind. But we're talking about the show. This isn't like we're not talking about, how they go out there and live their personal lives. Sometimes we do with Vanderpump Rules, but we don't get to see any of that. So if you're going to act like this, we need to be able to understand why. Like, give us some examples, Tamara. Like, what are the examples where she is not there for you? Give us that so we can understand your behavior in these scenes, because if not, it just comes off repugnant. But it was very interesting to hear Jeff say that, because I thought Jeff would just come out fully Shannon, but he was like, Tamara, you got to understand there's like this real relationship there, which is important to keep in mind. I just think if we're on a reality show, it's important to share that real relationship and the real feelings.
But you know as well as I do that what we see on reality TV isn't always reality. And so I believe that Tamara, I don't think she's a bad person. I do think that she has real concern. I do think that she has real love there. However, the way that she's going about expressing that is poor at best. And listen, I don't think Tamara cares. I'm going to be honest. I think that the problem too, sometimes like when people are on reality TV for a while, it's like, well, there's a certain amount of not caring about what people think that you have to do. Like even for you and I in this space, there's a certain amount of not caring of people who hate me. Like I can't hang my hat on that. And so I think that maybe sometimes Tamara takes that too far and it's like, well, I'm going to be me whether you like it or not. And it's like, okay, well, people aren't liking it. So this just makes you look bad. But either way, listen, I feel like the last thing that I wanted to say about Alexis and John, going back to that for a second, is that to me, this is the first time, and I want to get your thought on this, Ryan, is the first time I'm seeing the Bravo audience get mad at Bravo, because it seems like this was done to Shannon. And I think a lot of people are taking umbrage with, why is Alexis back? Why is this woman back on our screens with John Jansen? What kind of person is this that if you supposedly love somebody, right? And then you break up and then this is how you treat them. Alexis is so short-sighted to not understand. What do you think he's going to do to you? What do you think he is going to do to you? Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And the way this man is maligning Shannon and doing all of this stuff, it's wild to me. Because Alexis Bellino, let's not forget, she was the same person who talked about Jim Bellino being, like the God's gift.
Same flesh. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they got divorced and he was Satan in a smock. So it's like, pardon me if I don't believe your emotionally stunted teenage shtick. And, what you and her coming onto the show, number one, it felt very icky. And number two, now we see in the mid-season trailer that they're going to go on this trip. Shannon's doing a trip. They're going to where? London? Somewhere far away.
Yeah.
And in the middle, Alexis calls to say that they're engaged. And it's like, now that we see how this is literally playing out, it's like, can you please turn around, get this woman off my screen before I lose my whole mind, please.
But I mean, to push back on that a little bit is that I feel like it is a waste of time and energy to blame Bravo or blame these producers. Bravo is bravoing. These producers are producing. Like this is what, and they've done it right. We're enraged. They rage baited us and we're taking the bait. And you know what? We're talking about it. We got so much to talk about from this. So it's like, hell yeah. But yeah, when you think about it deeper, it does come off cruel. It comes off wild because also, if Alexis wasn't there, Shannon would have to really be talking every episode about her alcohol intake and running into that house. With Alexis there, it gives her this fulcrum in which to kind of rise up because even all the other ladies are in shock. Like Emily's like, what is Alexis doing here? So it's really interesting. But the show, like, that's what these shows do. Like
you're right.
that, and it's going to continue to be that way. I don't know if ethical reality television really exists, but maybe it shouldn't, so we can actually point out, right and wrong. But yeah, to your point, the fact that John Jansen, and like I said, I don't care about John Jansen, and the fact that he would even for Alexis, I cannot believe the red flag for Alexis wasn't that he wanted to be in a relationship with you in the first place. Like, to me, like, this man wanted to be in a relationship with you, that would be the red flag. Because in what world do you ever, after an emotional 3-year relationship with a housewife, say, I'm willing to give it another shot with somebody that's currently going to be on a new season with that ex? That then leads me to believe this man's behavior is completely unchecked. He has not looked into any, and we know how this story ends. Like, by God, like, hey man, if you are happy, if this truly is like 1 in a million thing of like, oh, I found my soulmate through Shannon Bedore in this show, then like, great, go live your life. But the fact that like he's allowing this to be, and then we see on the midseason trailer, he makes an appearance, which must be another one of those. It's not, because I agree with Ariana leaving in the finale and not having that conversation with Sandoval, but it's eerily similar of they're going to make it so they want to see Shannon's reaction of seeing John Jansen. So, just imagine at your worst moment already dealing with running this car into the house. Like, imagine them pulling up every one of your ex-boyfriends through your life and just popping them out into scenes. Like, hey, remember your high school boyfriend? We brought him here. Like, it's really interesting that they're doing. That's why I'm like, Shannon, I'm really proud of her because I just didn't think she'd be able to withstand any of this. I thought she'd clock out after 2 episodes.
Same. And I'm like, it does give me an immense respect for Shannon, number one. And number two, the last thing I want to say about John Jansen is that, and I posted this on my Instagram, I think what's most concerning for me is that you knew that she was intoxicated. You had all these hours of the footage of her doing whatever she's doing, and you don't even bother to get her help. You let her get in the car, and you don't even try to say, hey, come get your girl, call somebody, a friend, a family member, a daughter, whatever, come get your girl because she's out of pocket, as Lala would say. So I just feel that it says a lot about his character. All of this says a lot about his character. And I just realized, to go back to your earlier question of who has not worked on themselves, obviously Alexis, in my opinion, is number one. But she's not a full-time housewife. And I'm trying not to let her take up my headspace because I'm so annoyed about it all. But I feel like, So thank you. I mean, we had a marathon session today. We could have talked forever.
Oh my God. I could keep going because there's so much. That's what's so exciting about a decent season, is that it gives you so much meat on the bone. And even having these strong feelings, that's great. It's so much better than having passive feelings or like, whatever. I wasted an hour of my life. Sometimes with certain reality series, you'll feel that way. And it's so great to have these things to actually talk about. And it's so exciting to be able to look at, and that's why your show provides a service of being able to relate it to your own life and think about the human condition, which is how these shows all started. So if we can you can put that humanity back into this, it really makes it seem like we're doing something with it. We're not just watching trash TV, folks. We're doing something with our lives.
Well, thank you for validating me, because that's how I feel. I'm like, you're right. There's not ethical reality TV, but I'm making it ethical and humane and just educate. I don't know.
I can't wait to have you back on my show, because I got to, and by the way, you're Melissa, you guys listening. I mean, I am still blown away. You talked to Jackie right after the Jersey finale. You talked to Rachel Leviss. I mean, you've talked to some really people that have gone through some really intense things on Bravo. And, that's the thing, is like, for me, those interviews, I don't know if I could do them. Like, I don't know if because I have such a take on certain things. So it's great where you come from, that you can walk these people that are going through something. And that's a real,
Oh, thank you, Ryan. Thank you. I appreciate that. That just made me feel so lovely. So thank you so much for being here. I'll be happy to be on your show anytime. And please let everyone know. I mean, you're on Jeff Lewis. Like, I know it's been pretty consistent, but let people know where they can find you everywhere. Plug, promote.
Well, listen, the show is called So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. It's been around for a minute. So if you tried listening to it and you don't like it, I get it. But, if you ever want to try again, there's tons of episodes every week. But if not, I try to look at it through a humorous lens for the most part. But I really have some great conversations. We have great guests, sometimes Bravo celebrities. We don't just focus on Bravo either. It's like pop culture. And we'll be doing like The Secret Life of Mormon Wives on Hulu that's coming out pretty soon, which should be a really interesting reality series. So that's coming up. The Instagram is So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. I will tell you, with the Instagram, that's another thing of like keeping your head above water. This year, because of what we talked about at the beginning, I just have not felt funny. And so for me, sometimes it's been hard for me. I can do it on the podcast easier, but for those kind of things, I've lost a little joie de vivre. I've lost a little joy. So usually when I would make these really serious, silly or cutting posts or these images, it came from a real place of joy for me. And I haven't been really able to find that yet. But that's where the Instagram account comes in. So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. Jeff Lewis live on Sirius XM, channel 102, Radio Andy. I have been there now for a minute, for 9 or 10 months, and I have a great time. It gets me out of the house once a week, and I love everybody associated with that show. It's been nothing but positive for me. I always feel like I have to tell people that, because they're so shocked, because I'm like, it's not it's like an hour and 2 hours of my life. It's so easy and fun. And I think that's it. Oh, the one thing I always say with any podcast, but not so much mine, but make sure, if you're listening right now, go rate this podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because it does help with placement. There's the thing you might like this other show. If you rate that 5 stars, it's free to do it. It's a real quick flip of your thumb or whatever finger you want to use, but it really helps the podcaster. Not just this podcast, my podcast, any podcast, and I would ask, and my dad always says this, is that, don't hate. We can hate about reality TV. We can hate about certain characters. But if you don't like something, it's also just easy to move on. Yeah, it's also easy to find something that is your speed, is that I think sometimes we relish hating people and destroying people, and I have to check my own behavior in that all the time. But just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, is that there are places to get those yayas out in terms of hate, but try not to do it for like shows that are like trying to get going and stuff like that. We always got to support, because this takes so much work you wouldn't believe. And there's always we've talked about it before. There's always screw ups. There's always things that you're learning. I still edit my own podcast. I screw up all the time, 4 plus years in. And it's been a wild journey, but it's been so awesome. And I just hope you guys enjoyed this episode in particular, because I'm a narcissist.
We're not going to end on that, Ryan. Listen, I just want to say thank you for all that you bring, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope, for being vulnerable to express your grief and your process. And I think that I just appreciated your vulnerability today. I know that my listeners appreciate vulnerability always. And so hopefully we've not only had a kiki, but we also have had some good nuggets of information dropped from both of us. So thank you, Ryan,
this always energizes me. Like, I feel energy right now. Like, that's why this is so great, because it's a positive thing. And which, by the way, I got to ask you, because I asked my therapist, is there such a thing as a negative narcissist? Because I'm like, we were talking about narcissism, and I'm like, I don't necessarily like believe everything's about me, but I will believe everything negative is about me. And I was like, is there such a thing as negative narcissism? Like, where it's like the opposite of believing in yourself, of like complete, like, I was a real question I was asking. And she was like, well, not exactly. It was a very funny conversation.
Oh my gosh, that is funny. I mean, my short answer is, here's the thing. Some people, and I'm not going to call you a narcissist, Ryan. Let's be easy on Ryan, okay? First of all. But number two, I know you're kidding. But sometimes people who have narcissistic traits and tendencies, they can be it's like overcompensation, because they really don't feel good inside. And so there's two different branches of narcissism. It's people who really don't feel good about themselves and who try to put up this front. And then there are people who probably identify more on the psychopathology line of things, where they really don't think anything that they do is wrong. So some people assume that narcissists don't have feelings. They do have feelings. They're just usually about themselves, number one. And number two, they can be hard on themselves, but in ways that the average Joe, like, it's more like pity, like self-pity, like woe is me type of stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So. No. Yeah. Definitely. Hey, woe is me, you guys. That's it. Woe is me. I'm joking.
Here's the thing. We all go into our pool of self-pity. I was in my pity pool last week. Sure was. With all of this audio equipment and the engineering stuff, I was in a pity pool. And, sometimes we have to sit in a pity pool until we're pruny. And then, I say, you know what, Melissa, bitch, let's get out. Come on.
Well, when I hear that, I'm just so jealous you have a pool.
Well,
I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Even if it's a pity pool, it's still a pool. That's amazing. Like, it's so hard to come by.
Well, upgrade your pool to a pity pool, and then at least maybe you'll feel good about swimming in it, right?
I have a pity pond, hoping to elevate to a pool at some point. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Please, like Ryan said, give 5-star review for his podcast, for my podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to have you back. We'll have many more discussions, but thanks for all you shared. And to everybody listening, thank you so much for being here. Please check out Your Bish Therapist on Instagram, on Facebook, and I am now releasing all of my episodes directly to Facebook as well. I figured out how to do that. Yeah.
I don't even know how to do that.
All right, I'll help you out, Ryan. Look at
Nice.
that.
Amazing.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Till next time.
Bye.
Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.